over there. I'm so much better than they are. And then, of course, you have the publican, not a Republican, but the publican, a keeper of a house, a runner of a tavern. And this publican, he can't even rise his eyes up to heaven. He can't even look up. All he can do is bow and beat his breast in true contrition, true humility, true horror at his sin and at his life. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And Jesus asked the question, now who, when they walk out, is going to be the person that has their sins forgiven? Who's going to be the individual that's going to be right before God after that? I'm asking, who is it? Who's going to be the one? The publican. Why? Because he showed humility. And herein lies this aspect of this. Now, I want to take it a step further. I love this one. Here's one of the parables that I doubt, I've never done a sermon on this particular parable, and I doubt you've ever heard one. I know I can't. I thought I racked my brain. Well, here's a parable. Well, Jesus is saying He's giving them social advice. He's giving them society advice. But it's a parable. And He says this, Jesus, and He put forth a parable to those that were bidden when He marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying unto them, when thou art bidden of a man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. And he that bade thee and him come and say to thee, give this man place, and thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. You see what Jesus is saying there? He's saying, don't take the high room. Don't take the chief seat. Don't take the front seat at the very front of the table. Otherwise, somebody's going to come on and go, excuse me, that's my seat. And you're going to have to move down in shame. He says, here's what you do. But when thou art bidden, go and sit down in the lowest room, that when he that bade thee cometh, he may say unto thee, friend, go up higher. Then shalt thou have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee. For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. I love that. Jesus giving dining advice. I love that thought. He's saying, no, don't go to the high seat. Don't go to the important spot, because you might get pushed down. You might get set. They might tell you have to move. Go to the lowest place you can find. Go to the lowest room you can find. And that way, when the host comes through, he says, oh my friend, this isn't your place. You're so much higher up in the scale for me. See it? Pride goeth before a fall. Any other thoughts? Any other comments on this? That's a good proverb to keep in mind, and that's also a really great parable. Go home and read that. There's a whole lot more in there talking about humility and what it means to us as Christians. But I love the idea of Jesus giving, social advice to how to move and influence people in high society. I love that. All right. Verses 3 through 7. Now, I kind of put all these verses together because to me, they kind of all are talking about kind of the same thing, kind of the same idea. The integrity of the upright shall guide them, but the perverseness of the transgressor shall destroy them. Riches profit not in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivereth from death. The righteousness of the perfect shall direct his way, but the wicked shall fall by his own wickedness. The righteous of the upright shall deliver them, but transgressors shall be taken in their own naughtiness. When a wicked man dieth, his expectations shall perish, and the hope of the unjust man perish. Now, that's a lot. What are we talking about? Any thoughts on that? You have something? No? Any thoughts? I'm not on the right spot. Now, I'm going to tell you, in the other Proverbs, we've got a couple of other of these, that Proverbs 14, notice that last one. The wicked is driven away in his wickedness, but the righteous hath hope in his death. See, you don't see a lot in the Old Testament a discussion of a judgment. A day of judgment, a day where everyone is going to be judged, a day where the dead are going to be judged. But you see parts and pieces of it here. You see Job talking about his need and hoping for a righteous and correct judgment on him. And you see it here talking with the proverb, Solomon. He's telling us something about the future for us. It's really easy. We even have a couple of songs. One of the songs that we sing a song that, when living about us, how does it go? When people in sin living about us, never molested, though in the wrong, right? Further along, we'll know all about it. Further along, we'll understand why. Well, that concept in there is that you look out in the world and you see evil men, evil people. They're prospering. They're wealthy. People seem to have a great deal of respect for them. People look up to them. But notice what happens when judgments get brought against them. How quickly do they fall from that limelight? How quickly do they fall? And how great is that fall? And also keep this in mind, no matter what else we look at, no matter what else we have to deal with or see with this. Now, I don't know why it puts sinner as small. I meant to put it as larger, just to bring attention to it. But, anyway, wealth or privilege will not protect the sinner in the day of judgment. And that final day of judgment, that final apocalypse. Do you all know what the word apocalypse means? We talk about apocalyptic war, right? Or an apocalyptic event. And what we turn apocalypse into is a kind of great disaster. But do you actually know what apocalypse actually means? Revealing. Everything revealed. So you have the revelation of John, the apocalypse of John. But here's the reality. For a lot of people, having their whole lives laid bare would be truly a great disaster, wouldn't it? And think about this for a sinner, having your entire life laid bare, all of it, before your judge, before your creator. Everything laid bare. An apocalypse. And you might say to yourself, well, wait, hold on there. Hold on, Russell. I've got some terrible sins in my life too that I wouldn't want to be laid bare, to be apocalypsed. I got a lot of sin in my life. But as a Christian, as a righteous man, as one that is righteous before God, that is redeemed before God, those sins won't be revealed. You know why? Say it again. They're covered by His blood. They're covered by the righteousness that we have from God. Now think about that. That is a beautiful thing. Psalms 1 is a great one. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel. Oh my word, we're not even going to get halfway through this. Vendel's going to ring that bell on me, isn't he? Anyway, all right. John, marvel not at this, for the hour is coming, in that which all that are in the grave shall hear His voice and shall come forth. They have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation. There's what it is to have an apocalypse. We also have this one. Matthew 25, 31 through 46. It's the one where you have the people that say, when did we see you sick? When did we see you hungry? When did we see you athirst? And Jesus says, when you did it to the least of these. When you didn't do it to the least of these, that was me. And then, of course, those people are told, go to my left hand. Go to that place of damnation. Go to that place of ultimate judgment. And then, of course, there's others that are on the right-hand side that are heading into the kingdom. And they say, well, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you thirsty? When did we see you in need? Jesus, when did we see any of that? And Jesus says, when you did it to the least of these, my brothers. It does. It ties back into that idea of showing humility. And this is something you're going to see played out throughout the entire section. Actually, throughout almost a lot of the Proverbs have this idea in it. They also have an idea that you're going to see a lot of this idea of of reaping what you sow. Now, we're going to see that one crop up several times. It'll come up here a lot, and it'll also come in other places, in several other Proverbs. Verses 8 and 9. Any other thoughts on the other that we just did? Any other thoughts? It does show a great deal of humility to have to acknowledge and to see that and not have that pride. The righteous is delivered out of trouble, and the wicked cometh in his stead. And a hypocrite with his mouth destroyeth his neighbor, but through knowledge shall the just be delivered. Now here's another great one. So in another of the Psalms we have, the wicked shall be a ransom for the righteous and the transgressor for the upright. Now this might seem at first blush a little odd, but I think we have to understand something about hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is incredibly destructive. It is destructive to those around us, and it is instructive to the individual. I have done door knocking. I've talked to people. I've talked to people about Christ. I've talked to people about the church. And I can tell you often I hear some variation. Well, I don't want to go there. All they are a bunch of hypocrites. Which now, my first response to that is, oh, so you're going to quit your job and quit the clubs that you're in and just check out a life? Where exactly are you going to find a place where there aren't a bunch of hypocrites? Which maybe is not the most appropriate or helpful response, but let's be honest with ourselves. There's a lot of hypocrisy in the world, and it is destructive. Hypocrites are destructive. Think about Haman as he tries to destroy Israel and Esther. How does he try to destroy? He through hypocrisy, through lies. But what happens to him? He's actually the one the tables get turned. He's the one that gets executed. We also see the same thing playing out with the lying prophet, which is a really weird section in 1 Kings 13. You've got a prophet that lies to this younger prophet and gets him killed. And near as I can tell, there's no reckoning that ever happens for the lying prophet. It's just a kind of an odd little story. I'm not discounting it. It's true. And unfortunately, it's exactly the way the world works sometimes. There are those that are evil, that are hypocrites, that are liars, that they just destroy others because they can. Any other thoughts? Any thoughts on this as we go through here? If you ever want me to stop, just raise your hand. Just maybe raise both. I might, if I miss you the first time around. Romans 14:19, Paul tells us this: let us therefore follow after the things which make for peace, and things wherewith one may edify another. See, there's your opposite of that concept of what you've got going on, of this the righteousness is delivered out of trouble. But through knowledge shall the just be delivered. See, we're delivered by this. Colossians 4:6, Paul speaking also, he says, let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that ye may know how ye ought to answer every man. Now that word salt, it's come into a different kind of meaning now. You'll hear people say, or actually I'm not sure if it's probably I'm so out of touch that I'm 10 years behind. I still say cool beans, and I've been told that nobody ever said that. And I am positive that it was said. My wife back there, her head pops up. She says, I remember that when I used to say cool beans. No, she's shaking her head. Oh, yeah, that's right. You're the one that told me nobody ever said that, aren't you? No? She's like, I don't know. But people say, well, that's awful. He's talking awful salty. You know, he's being kind of brusque. He's being kind of pointed. He's like jabbing you. But that's not what Paul's talking about here. What he's talking about is this idea of how influential salt can be. Salt, when added to something, permeates. It penetrates. It both preserves and enhances. Do you know why you add a pinch of salt to a cake or to something sweet? Do I have any bakers? Not you, Christy. You can't answer. I know you know the answer. Does anybody know why you add a little bit of salt to a cake or to a cupcake or something? Do you know why? Because salt doesn't just make things taste salty. Salt makes things taste more like themselves. So you add a little bit of salt to a tomato, it's more tomato-y. You add a little salt to your steak, it's a little more steaky. You add a little bit of salt to that cupcake or that cake, it's a little bit sweeter. Now, if you add 2 tablespoons as opposed to 2 teaspoons to a cake, as someone did one time when they were making a birthday cake, then you get the salty. Then it tastes inedible. So he's like, yeah. She's like, yeah, that's it. Yes, and it was awful. Well, at least you tried. But so there you go. You can have too much salt. But Paul is talking about something that permeates and makes everything a little better. Any thoughts on this? Now see, you all talk for Brian, but you're not talking for me. I'll just take it that I'm just doing such a thorough job that I've covered everything possible. No, I'm kidding. Here's a great one. When it goeth well with the righteous, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perish, here is shouting. By the blessing of the upright, the city is exalted, but it is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked. Now here is one that is dealing with very real things, with the social construct, we say we have a social contract, right? We have a contract with our fellow man. We have our country. So what? You've got the local city here, you've got a state, you've got the country, the world. And Solomon is telling us that when it goeth well for the righteous, what happens? The city as a whole rejoiceth. If it's going well for the righteous in a place, in a country, everybody gets the benefit, don't they? If you have honest men, now, who in here can remember back in the day when a handshake was enough? That if someone said their word, that was enough. I got in trouble one time because a good friend of mine handed me $50, and I counted it. It was like in ones, and I counted it right there in front of him. He said, Russell, what are you doing? It's 50. I said, I owed you 50. I said, I know, man, I know. Try being a cashier for 5 years and see if you don't do it. My mother hands me money. I'm counting it out. Now, part of it really is I did work as a cashier for like 5 years. No, 7 years. But the other part of it is, can we trust people today? How much is the rejoicing of the righteous going on? How well are things for the righteous right now? There is a woman in Britain that got arrested. And she got arrested for thinking a prayer in front of an abortion clinic. She was thinking about a prayer. There are individuals up in Canada that are in jail, are being prosecuted because they have preached God's word and have said that homosexuality is a sin. And they are now being tried under Canada's hate laws. I'm not talking conspiracy theory here. I'm not talking crazy stuff. Look it up. It's there. Coming soon to a court near you. How are the righteous doing? And I'll ask you, how's our country doing? Any of you there recognize Proverbs? What righteous men do, rejoice, there's great glory, but when the wicked rise, a man is hidden. When the wicked rise, men hide themselves, but when they perish, the righteous increase. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Now, this dude up here, Alexis Charles Henry Circe Comte de Tocqueville. Does anybody know who that is? A brilliant guy. You need to go home right now and read both of his books there's 2 books he read that you need to read. Who is this guy? This dude is a Frenchman. He was a political scientist, an aristocrat. He was a diplomat. He was like one of these all-around great guys. He knew how to do everything. Brilliant man. So what happened in France and other places, America becomes its own country. The rest of Europe thought, well, they'll collapse in about a year or so. Nobody's ever had a country that's this large, has this much diverse people over this much territory. There is no way that America can survive. It's too big, too diverse, too much. It'll fall apart. But it didn't. We thrived. Now, we took a thrashing in the War of 1812, but they thought, well, that's it, they're done. Nope, we kept going. More than that, pound for pound, person for person, we had some of the lowest percentages of police to population of anybody. We had fewer police. We had fewer sheriffs. We had fewer people enforcing the law. And the Europeans were like, how is this possible? We want to learn how to do this because we want to save money. Like, get rid of our police too. Well, what are the Americans doing? Well, Tocqueville comes, he goes through America, travels extensively, and he finds out this. And this is a quote from one of his books. You've got Democracy in America and the Old Regime and the Revolution. I suggest reading both of those books. If you can only read one of them, read Democracy in America. It is a brilliant insight into our early America, and it's an insight into our world today. But here's what he said. America is great because she is good. If America ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. Society is endangered not by the great prolificacy of others, the sins and crimes of others, of a few, but by the laxity of morals among all. There is no country in the world in which everything can be provided for by law, or in which political institutions can prove a substitute for common sense and public morality. Liberty cannot be established without morality, nor morality without faith. Like I said, he had some real insights into us and the world in general. And more importantly, Solomon saw it a long time ago. He wrote it in Proverbs. It's the exact same thing that he wrote there. If you have righteous people, then you have a righteous country. If you have wicked people, what do you got? You have a wicked country. And it really has nothing to do with the institutions themselves, although this can help. Now, any thoughts on this? Any other insights? Here's a great warning to us. The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. There are consequences to this kind of action. And the proverbist, Solomon makes this plain in his writings. He makes it plain that there is a consequence to this. There is a consequence to the individual, and there is the consequence to the individual's nation that he's in, the community that he's in. You cannot have hypocrites in your community that are running things. You cannot have wicked in your community running things. You cannot have people getting away with wickedness and sin and immorality and expect for things to turn out okay. God's Word tells us it is so. Some obscure French political scientist and diplomat told us about it, and we see it play out daily on the news. Solomon had it dead to rights. Now, lest you despair, I don't want you to despair, because we've got Jesus on our side. We've got Jesus telling us something very important. Ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? Now, what do we know about salt? It doesn't take... So, my 2 tablespoons in my cake was way too much. It doesn't take too much salt to have that effect, does it? Just a little sprinkle. That's all you need. Now, my oldest daughter, she gets food and she's already salting it even before she tastes it. But she's got a heavy salt taste. But I had one of the most worst things and horrible things that happened to me is I had this weird heart murmur. And I collapsed. Fainted. Anyway, I fainted. And they take me in, they're monitoring my heart, and it's like, well, you've got this odd little thing going on. We need to put you on a DASH diet. Anybody in here know what that is? Now, I don't remember what all of it means, but I do remember what one thing that happened to me was no salt on anything. Oh, man. Tomato soup, one of my favorites. Awful. Steak, awful. No bacon, because you can't find anything with unsalted bacon. That just don't happen. Nothing. No salt. No salt. How long was I on that stupid diet, Christy? 2 years. 2 years. No salt. And then I got my salt back because they found out, they said, basically, they gave me a bunch of gobbledygook in the medical thing, but basically they were like, we don't know what happened. It went away. I'm like, great. Can I have my salt back? Got my salt back. And all it took was just a little bit. And all that food tasted good again. My tomato soup tasted like tomato soup. My steak tasted like a steak. I got to eat bacon again. But you know what? It didn't take all that much salt to make a difference. There's these social scientists that did this really fascinating study on social media. And what they discovered, and this will be my last one, I'll just have to tell Brian I got to have next class if you all will let me, and we'll finish this out. I'm sorry. But they did this social studies test. And what they did was they had these groups online. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to see if they could change their opinion about some subject. Gun control, abortion, whatever. They didn't care. What they discovered is if you could have just 10% of any group, so if you had 100 people, it took 10. If you had 1,000 people, it took 100. If you had 10,000, it took 1,000. If it had 100,000, it took 10,000. You get the picture. 10%. 10% was all it took. And if that 10% was hardcore and they stuck to their guns and they didn't compromise and they stayed true to their beliefs, they could change the 90. They could change the 900. They could change the 90,000. They could change the 900,000. They could change that other group and pull them their way. Do you see the application? All it takes is God's remnant to pull it the other way. That's what I've got. I'm so sorry I only got halfway through. Hopefully you all will tell Brian, please let him finish up. So thank you guys. I appreciate your attention. You have been wonderful. Thank you very much.